All right, so today in our little video, we're going to be talking about talking, or more specifically, looking at how we communicate science and scientific ideas. Now, for a lot of you, this is a scary part of science. It's very hard to even kind of formulate how to say things inside our heads, let alone communicating those ideas with our words or on paper when we're writing reports. However, what I hope to do in this short little tutorial is to give you some tips and pointers into understanding how you might become better at communicating science. So, when people think about communicating science, they think about the great scientists who are brilliant and able to communicate really complicated ideas in succinct and really effective ways. Take Albert Einstein, for example. He was not only a genius, but he was really good at making really complicated ideas sound simple. Now, in many ways, scientists are quite reclusive and shy. We don't like actually getting out there because we just like working in the labs and working by ourselves. But there's no point of doing scientific research unless we can actually go out there and tell people about it. So one of the ways that scientists do this is through speaking, not only through teaching like I am to you, but also through scientific conferences where scientists go out and communicate their latest findings with their peers or fellow scientists. Okay, but this is just one way of communicating science. Often we watch documentaries. Take, for example, David Attenborough. He has pioneered, in many respects, scientific documentaries, particularly in biology, and he's made science much more popular amongst lay people and people who aren't actually familiar with scientific ideas. And you'll notice that we'll use lots of his clips to kind of make science more exciting. Okay, so it's not just documentaries, but we also can see that popular films, for example, The Martian, that was a recent movie starring Matt Damon, which was based on a book actually written by Andy Weir. Now, I would strongly recommend you watch both the book and watch the movie and read the book because it actually integrates science and scientific ideas quite nicely into these two genres or two modes of communication. Now that's how we communicate science at a popular level, but by and large, most of the scientific communication happens when we put pen to paper. This can occur in a range of ways, particularly when we write scientific reports. That's the main way scientists communicate. Might not be the most exciting or accessible mode of communication, but it is the most popular and by means the one that we will, as scientists or science students, will have to grapple with. And I'll talk about how we can get better at that just shortly. But when we say writing, there's very many different types of scientific writing. So, for example, we have, what do we have here? We have the typical textbook, okay? This is really dense. This is a biology textbook I had at uni. I didn't read it all, unfortunately, but this sort of information or level of writing requires years of study and synthesis, and you need to really be an expert. So a lot of these people write these textbooks are professors at university, and they're usually for university students or high school students like yourself. Now that's one way of writing or communicating science. Another way is actually through using like taxonomic pictures or descriptions of species. So for example, this is a guide to understanding marine life in Australia, and they use pictures both as well alongside the descriptions of the different types of species that you might find. Okay, that doesn't necessarily have to just be for marine life, it can be for all sorts of taxonomic groups. And finally, another type of scientific writing could include thesis writing. Okay, so this is my PhD thesis. It's quite substantial, it took me a couple of years to write. But again, it's like a scientific report or several scientific reports all bundled into one. Okay? Now, we also might think that science can be communicated to the general public through writing as well. So this is a recent endeavour by the University of New South Wales, where they've started promoting scientific writing at the popular level. So these are nice little short stories written like stories, not so much like scientific reports, which actually communicate complex scientific ideas. All right, so that's I guess the background or scope of scientific communication in writing. But like I mentioned before, I want to kind of go through the steps that you'll need, particularly when you're writing any sort of report, whether that's for a depth study or when you're looking at writing up your results from your experiments at school. There's certain structures that you'll need to know and little skills that you can get better at. So let's just run through what we would expect if we were hoping for you to write a scientific paper. So like I said, reports are the bulk of our way we communicate in science. And really these reports, whether you from another country or whether you're from Australia, the reports generally follow a set structure. And you might already have seen some of these. So it will start off with a title, and then an abstract or summary, which is usually kind of just summarizing each part of the report to come. Then you'll have an introduction, which starts out with a broad concept and narrows down into a specific hypothesis. And then it will launch into the next section, which is the materials or methods section. That's where it outlines exactly what the scientists did and what material they used and that sorts of thing. So if someone else wanted to replicate to see if the results are accurate, they could follow the methods down to a T and hopefully produce the same results or some contrasting results in some instances. So yes, sorry, that's the, just going back. So then after the methods, we move on to looking at the results section. Okay, and the results is where we kind of use a lot of numbers and descriptive text about what's actually happening with the data that we collected. This section can also include tables and graphs and figures and things like that. And then after the results section, we have what's called the discussion and then perhaps a conclusion. So the discussion is where we what do our results actually mean in the greater context of scientific findings that are up to date. So this might sound, quite, straightforward, but actually when you try and do it yourself, it can be quite daunting. So here are my tips of how to go about writing a scientific report. And actually it's not like you would expect, basically just going from A to B, so starting at the abstract and finishing at the conclusion. It's actually much easier, I find, if you start off with the methods. Okay, the methods is what comes after the introduction, and the methods is usually a lot easier to start with because it's what's familiar. You've actually done this. Okay, these are the procedures that you followed, the equipment that you used, the independent and dependent variables that you chose, that sort of thing. So it's very easy to get started in the methods section. After you've done the methods, I would encourage you to go in any report to move to the results section. Whilst this might be the most technical and very precise section of the report, it's often the next easiest to complete because you can put some graphs, you can describe what you're looking at, that sort of thing. And it's often also the shortest section of a report. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of text needed in a result. So you just need to be blunt and straight to the point and not use much descriptive the words that kind of might be a bit vague. Just need to be used quite plain English. Then after your results section, I'll then encourage you to move on to the discussion. Okay, the discussion is about explaining what the results actually mean. All right, and then you need to use any explanations that you'd use. You need to back that up with scientific reports that have been done in the past. So you'd need to kind of get some references there. And now some reports ask you then actually to do a conclusion. So what's the take-home message? Not all reports require this, but sometimes it's good just to put a nice little conclusion at the end of your discussion. So once you've done all these sections, then I think it's important to go back and write your introduction, because you've got all that information swirling around in your head, and it's much easier now to kind of set the scene and understand where you want the reader, what you want the reader to understand before they start reading the detailed analysis of your results. The important thing about the introduction, you can think of it like an upside down pyramid. So you want to start off broad, and then you want to narrow down into the particular study that you're looking at. Okay, so for example, if you're looking at the effect of deforestation on Amazon forests on a particular mammal, you might start off looking at why deforestation is a bad thing. Okay, where has it happened around the world? And then you might start narrowing it down to, well, the most drastic deforestation is happening in the Amazon, and okay, what sort of impacts are happening within the Amazon. You might then start focusing on the particular animal that you're going to be studying, and then after you've got to this point, you present your hypotheses or your aim for the study, and then you launch into your methods. Okay. Once you've done your introduction, then I think you're ready to do your abstract. And now the abstract is generally like a very short summary of every single section of your scientific report. Okay, so I would expect to see maybe 2 or 3 sentences which talk about the introduction, like the main points of the introduction, as well as a couple of sentences of the methods, then results, and then the discussion. All right, sorry, abstract. And then finally, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I would finish with writing a nice catchy title. Now that you've completed the whole results of the paper, you know the thrust of the whole thing, and you're actually in a good position to write a nice title, because in most cases, it's the title that people read first, and you want it to accurately capture exactly what you've written in your report. All right, so I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, I'm always available on my email, okay? And before I do go, actually, if what I've just described to you, this brief little description of how to write a scientific paper, I would strongly recommend you reading this book by, who was it? Jane Pecknick. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. But this was a lifesaver for me. Before I had read this book, I struggled a lot with writing scientific reports, particularly in biology. But after reading this, it gave me a really good description of how I could go about breaking down the reports into their various sections, just like I've described today. You can borrow this from me in class if you want to, or I can see if we can get the library to get a copy. All right. Well, until next time, study hard and good luck.